Good morning. Don Koones here. Of course, you know what our subject is today already. You read it in your little announcement bulletin, the best and worst of the Oval Office. Well, first of all, this is a great subject for today because of the fact that this is an election year. So a good time to talk about the White House and past presidents. Now, I want to make something clear from the very beginning before I even start the lecture and so on and so forth. When we think about it, who are the best and the worst in the Oval Office? And the idea wasn't original with me. It came out from the History Channel. In fact, I wanted to show you that here it is, here's the video, and it's simply called The Best and Worst U.S. Presidents DVD. Here it is. So that's where I took the information from. However, before I went to the video, I sat down and made my own list. Who did I think was the best? Who did I think was the worst? And I came pretty close. I was surprised at some of the answers they gave, but in most cases, I could see my way through it. Now, you have to understand also today that this is not anything having to do with politics. It has nothing to do with Democrats or Republicans or independents or whatever. It has nothing to do with that. I'm simply looking at people and what people accomplish, nothing having to do with political parties. And also, when you make your list, and some people, when they saw this coming up, they probably thought, well, I know what I would put on the list. I would put so-and-so and so-and-so. You'll find it very interesting. You will agree and you will disagree with the whole thing. So actually, there's really no need to say, I don't think that should have been on the list. I wouldn't have put it on the list because I myself did not put it on the list. As I said before, it comes from the History Channel. This is what people who work with history all the time, this was their summation, it wasn't mine. Also, opinions will change in the course of time. If you made the list it even goes this far with historians. If you made the list last year and you make it this year, you might change your mind. There is a person in the top 10 who in 1960 would have been on the lowest of the lowest. Now he's in the top 10, you see. Also, when we get to it, numbers 1 and 2 of the best presidents keep fluctuating all the time. One year historians put number 2 up at the top, the next year they put number 1. Back and forth, back and forth. So again, it's a changing type of a list. I can give you one example how things change in history. The famous airplane, the Enola Gay, that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That plane, after World War II, a very revered plane, and so on and so forth. However, there was a time when a portion of the plane was displayed at the Smithsonian in Washington National Air and Space, and there were riots outside, and so on and so forth. Today, the plane is in total contact, and it is at the Hazy Center near Dulles International. You can go and see it today. Well, before we start the lecture today, I'm going to call upon Neil to help me with something. He's going to put on a quick little tape just about the presidency and the White House, and then we're going to get to that famous list. So Neil will take it right from here.
It is a simple mansion, built of stone and irony, a symbol of freedom invested with the labor of slaves and great statesmen alike. It is like no other place on earth, a house alive with the past and present.
I deem this reply a full acceptance of the unconditional surrender of Japan.
That a strong and a confident and a vigilant America stands ready tonight.
It is an odd place where the monumental and the mundane coexist.
Then to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
It is where the most critical decisions in our history are made, and where any American can visit.
And of all the things that American independence means to you and to me and to our.
My fellow Americans, our Constitution works. Here, the people rule.
Now you will journey through time and a day, meeting the people and hearing the stories that give this powerful place its soul. For this is more than just an office, or a monument, or a home. It is an American idea, known as the White House.
The whole business today. And I have two lists today. I have the worst and I have the best. And I go, maybe it's just me. People say to me, do you want to hear the good news or the bad news? Usually I hear, I don't know why, I want to hear the bad news first, then you have everything to look forward to. And in this case, I'm going to start with the worst. Now, remember again, this is in degree, this is how they listed them. And remember again, it's the opinion of the History Channel. This is put this together, but of course with good reasoning. The first on the list, this is the worst, U.S. Grant. U.S. Grant. Now, let's get something clear right from the beginning. I was sorry to see this here. I think it's rather sad. It's one of those situations where, first of all, you have a man who is a fabulous general, excellent in the military. You think of Shiloh, you think of Vicksburg, you think of Petersburg, and so on. When Lincoln wanted to get the job done, he called U.S. Grant, you see. Unconditional surrender Grant. Put Grant in a military uniform, put him on the field, and he is exceptional. But don't put him in the White House. Another example, and I just want to give this example, it's my personal opinion. Another president would be Jimmy Carter. I don't think of Jimmy Carter, understand what I'm saying, as a great president. No. Jimmy Carter is a humanitarian, a great humanitarian, you see. Same way with Grant. The problem with Grant was great on the field, great in military, outstanding. But in the White House, it just wasn't his calling. And it seems that during his administration, there was a lot of friends who received jobs when they shouldn't have gotten jobs. People given positions when they weren't qualified for them, and so on and so forth. Simply because they were friends of the president, and so on and so forth. And so there, again, he's listed very low. I will tell you that he didn't hold a high esteem with Mary Todd Lincoln. She used to call him the butcher. She had no time for him. But nevertheless, all things aside, U.S. Grant, tremendous military. However, the term of office was not the place for him. The next one on the list is Warren G. Harding. Warren G. Harding. I love the description. I love the description that the History Channel get. They said he died in office and no one cared. Now, what a wonderful epitaph to have at the end of your life. Died in office and nobody cared. He had bad team members who took advantage of him. This is Warren Harding. Under him was, of course, the famous Teapot Dome scandal, which was a secret listing of federal oil reserves by the Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall. So Teapot Dome, that followed him. However, let's get into more specifics, and this the History Channel does. During his terms of office, you could walk into the Oval Office and he'd be there playing poker, certainly not doing his job. Also, he had a problem with drinking. Also, they even have now I understand what recreation is, but While he was supposed to be in the Oval Office many times, and while things were waiting to be done, he was playing golf. In other words, his idea of recreation and work got kind of mixed up. Also during his administration, there was a certain amount of womanizing, and I don't know if you knew this, it was a shock to me that even while he was in office, he had an illegitimate child. Interesting, Warren Harding. You can see why he's on the list. The next one is no surprise. Usually when we think of a bad president or a president we'd like to forget, that would be Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon's on the list of bad presidents. Now let's again watch yourself. Just like with U.S. Grant, what did I say? Excellent general. In the case of Richard Nixon, excellent politician. He was an excellent politician. However, I think it's interesting. I was doing a tour in Washington. When I do a tour in Washington, I get in that area where I'm going near the Kennedy Center and so on and towards the National Cathedral. I can't help it, but when the bus turns and I'm doing my lecture, I go, oh, there's the Watergate. There's the Watergate Hotel. Well, Nixon, the Watergate, you see. The problem with Nixon, of course, was the lies. The truth, of course, was his big problem. Lie, 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 and of course he faced impeachment and of course chose resignation. He taught the nation how to distrust the government, Richard Nixon. I always said when it got to Richard Nixon, the one I felt sorry for in the whole story was the wife, Pat. I think he always disgraced her. There would be things he'd say about her that would be embarrassing and so on. I also said that if anybody could have written a big selling book, a national, it would have been Pat Nixon, the backdoor scenes and so on and so forth. The president that came aboard just after Lincoln because of the assassination is the next one on the list, Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson, worst presidents, you see. By the way, I bet you didn't know this. On Inauguration Day, Andrew Johnson was drunk on Inauguration Day. You have to understand the period of history. The Civil War had just come to an end. We're just entering a very, very, very difficult period. Of course, Reconstruction. Reconstruction. You need a very adaptive. You need a man who really is on the ball and knows what he's doing. You're bringing the country back together again, and Andrew Johnson was not that man. He was stubborn and he was inflexible. There's the big problem right away. You have to be agreeable. You have to look at both sides. Lincoln could have done the job. Lincoln could have brought the nation back in a much more unified nature. But not Johnson. Stubborn, inflexible, and not only that, he was racist, and most notably racist, made it very known that he was racist. He fired Edward Stanton, the Secretary of War, and he was faced with impeachment, although it didn't go through. And he could, if stubbornness and inflexibility and being a racist wasn't bad enough, he could not work with Congress. So you go from an era where a man is assassinated, and now you hit this era in history, this Reconstruction, where you need all the understanding in the world, and you don't get it from the president. You don't get it from the president. The next one on the list, Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce. First of all, he had a very depressed personality. Also, he was an alcoholic. Depressed and alcoholic. Did not, and by the way, when you talk about Franklin Pierce, you're talking about that era before the Civil War, you see, just before the Civil War. He did not depress an opportunity for the South to expand to the West. In other words, there was a big problem in the country at that time. Was slavery going to move into the Western states? Franklin Pierce did nothing to suppress that. It just kept moving on and on. The problem kept moving. During his time, you have the Kansas-Nebraska bill. I'm not here to explain the whole thing. I can tell it to you in one or two lines. Kansas-Nebraska bill simply says this: we don't know what to do about slavery. We have all these new states coming in. Should they come in free or should they come in slave? The Kansas-Nebraska bill simply says, let the people decide. Popular sovereignty. Let the people vote. I can't handle it. Let the people handle it. Franklin Pierce, of course, did nothing about the situation that was coming. The situation with slavery and all of the horrible outbreaks was getting worse and worse and worse. Franklin Pierce did nothing and just left it for the next administration. And then the one that, for us, of course, who live in Pennsylvania, it's probably the one that's the hardest pill to swallow, you see. We have one president from Pennsylvania, one president, James Buchanan, and James Buchanan is not only on that list, but he's at the very bottom of the list. Of all the presidents of the United States, he's at the bottom. Now, again, let's not hit all the negative. What was the positive? First of all, James Buchanan was a brilliant speaker, a brilliant speaker. However, he lacked conviction and so on and so forth, and they put him down. Now, there's several things that happened during his administration that doesn't help matters, and one is the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott, the slave who traveled with his master up from slave territory into the Wisconsin area, and then Dred Scott said he wanted to be free, and of course it was voted he could not be free, and he had to go back with his master. That wasn't a good situation for the North. Buchanan had little support from the House and the Senate, and he was against slavery. He was against slavery, which is a good thing, however, took no action. And I think, personally, the reason they put him on the bottom of the list is he is the administration before Lincoln. The situation is getting worse and worse and worse. You can already see we're heading for a horrible war, and Buchanan's not going to do that much. He's going to kind of shift it to the next administration, and that's going to be Abraham Lincoln. So there they are. Again, I say to you, I'm starting at the worst of the list. That's probably, you may have listed some things there on your list for the worst. However, I think I'm more interested in what you put in for the top 10, and these are the top 10. By the way, I'm going to be going from 10 down, 10, 9, 8, to, number 1, you see. Well, and again, on some of these, you're going to be very, very, very interested, because it's probably someone you don't have on the list at all. Number 10, Lyndon Baines Johnson. I was surprised there, but then when I thought about it more, I got the reasoning. First of all, President Johnson, the first image I see all the time is on Air Force One, Jackie Kennedy in the blood-stained dress, and he taking the oath of office, you see. People said that he really took his administration from tragedy to success, you see. Well, calmed a nation. There is one positive, big positive thing about Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was an excellent politician. Excellent politician, and he had the ability to persuade people. If you see anything about Lyndon Baines, for instance, if Lyndon Baines Johnson wanted to put some bills through Congress or whatever, some policy and so on, if he started and he met opposition, he was able to go another direction or another direction and so on. He could maneuver and persuade people very, very well to get done what he wanted to get done. He was an excellent politician. Never took no for an answer. Never took no for an answer. Don't give him no, because he'll find an ulterior way to go, you see. Many people viewed him as crude. I think this is the comparison between he and the Kennedy administration, you see. There is a difference there. The press picturing him, of course, holding the dogs up by the ears, and so that got notoriety and so on. But then on the other hand, the History Channel says, don't forget he waged a war on poverty. He supported at that time Medicare, and he supported civil rights. Also, he gave us the Great Society, the Great Society. His great challenge, there's no doubt about it, the great challenge of his whole administration was the Vietnam War. What to do with it, you see. Hot potato, what do we do with it? I could tell you one other thing about the family, and that's Lady Bird. I don't think I'm ever in Washington in the spring that I don't go past areas where the azaleas are blooming and the tulips and so on and so forth in central Washington. I always think Lady Bird Johnson. Remember, that was her aim, beautification and so on and so forth, and did a lot of work with that. So number 10 on the list, Lyndon May Johnson. Number 9, Dwight David Eisenhower. Dwight David Eisenhower. Well, this is one of these eras that we had U.S. Grant, who went from general to president, and it just didn't work out. Obviously, it worked out for Eisenhower, you see. Well, that big general's name, you see. Well, here we go. Led the free war to victory, of course, over Germany. That was a big positive for Eisenhower. Eisenhower had a very powerful name. He had a great character in working with people. He could work and handle people very, very nicely. He stood up against the communists, we know that, and he defended the free world in the Cold War. He ended the war in Korea. Now, the first thing I think about, and I'm not even at the bottom of this list, the first thing I think about when I think Eisenhower, first of all, we add 2 states to the Union, you see. We add Alaska and Hawaii. So we go from 48 states to 50 states. Incidentally, when you visit the estate in Gettysburg, the farm, you see, and you're going in, I don't know if you realize this, but as you're going into the house area and the barn area and so on, you have this long entranceway, and there are evergreens on each side of the entranceway. There are 50 evergreens. I don't know if people, 50 states in the Union. The other thing about Eisenhower is during his administration, the interstate highways. And now we just take them for granted. Are we looking for 81 or 80 or 83 in this area or what? We just take them for granted. They're there. That's during the Eisenhower administration, the interstates. Just think what they're doing for our nation today, especially today with all the delivery trucks on them and so on and so forth. His challenge was the admissions of blacks to schools in Little Rock, and he, of course, stood for black rights. This is Eisenhower. During Eisenhower's administration, and how many presidents can say this, during his 8 years of administration, we had peace and economic growth for 8 years. That's interesting. Most presidents can't claim that. Number 8. Now, this one is interesting because, of course, current events and demonstrations right now and so on. So you'll find this one very interesting. This is one, of course, that is being protested against right now, yet comes in number 8, and that's Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson. By the way, Woodrow Wilson's home, probably most of you know that, the home is in Stanton, Virginia. Stanton, Virginia. Near the house now, it wasn't there before, is now the Woodrow Wilson Museum is there, and his Pierce Arrow. And in Stanton, I guess it's coming up this week unless they've changed it, but every 4th of July, they would have a parade in Stanton, Virginia, and the Pierce Arrow, his car, would be in the parade. Well, anyway, very, very learned man, college professor. Well, president of Princeton, hell. So, fought for better working conditions. Also fought for women's rights. Don't forget Woodrow Wilson. You see the World War I. We're coming to the end of World War I. 1919, it's easy to remember. 1919, the 19th Amendment, women get the right to vote. Very easy to remember. 1919, 19th Amendment, women get the right to vote. He wanted to make the world safe for democracy after the war, you see. And you know, of course, what he fought for, the League of Nations. After World War I, he gets on a train all over the United States promoting the League of Nations. The problem was European countries wanted the League of Nations, anything for peace. The United States did not. We did not sign it. We did not enter the League of Nations. However, he will go on and win the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, we did not get into the League of Nations, but later on after World War II, we realized something has to be done. So Woodrow Wilson starts that process, which leads eventually to the United Nations in 1947, you see. Well, there it is. League of Nations. America, and if you have that question in your mind, why, probably some people are saying, well, why didn't we enter the League of Nations? Because we were of the thinking of that time that if anything erupted in the world and we had to go to war against any foe, we did not want to sit in a body of people and ask permission to go to war. We wanted our own decision. In other words, if we want to do this and do that, we don't want to be confined by a group of people. That was the thinking at that time, you see. So the League of, it was a big hit in Europe. Europe wanted peace. Europe was torn apart. The United States didn't want the League of Nations. And it really was a defeat for him. However, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Again, interesting. I'm coming down to number 7. Another one who's being lambasted right now, protest. In fact, his statue being torn down right now. And that's interesting. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson. Old Hickory. Old Hickory. I always love to tell the story that you know how big our country was when Andrew Jackson was elected president, because they said he was the president from the great American West, Tennessee. Tennessee, you see. Well, his house is there today. A big war hero. Big war hero in Jackson. Well, the War of 1812, Andy Jackson, the Battle of New Orleans. Say, well, big war hero. However, we call him a frontiersman, and he proved the fact that any American could be president of the United States, especially one from Tennessee and not from the Eastern Seaboard. Well, anyway, these are the two conflictions of Andrew Jackson. This is why he's considered the greatest on the great list, and this is also why people are in protest. On the other hand, you see, he's a man of confliction. First of all, why is he so great? There was a time during his administration that there was this conflict between the North and the South, you see. Slavery, back and forth, back and forth. And during, during Andrew Jackson's time, of course, South Carolina, I won't go into all the details, South Carolina threatened to leave the Union. And Andrew Jackson said, you are not going to leave the Union if I have to send federal troops. And South Carolina backed down, and the whole situation went away. That probably, I think the conflict with South Carolina, that's probably what put him on the list. On the other hand, and of course, as I said, he believed in preserving the Union. However, on the other hand, he was very anti-Native American, you see. Native American. This starts even on his way to New Orleans when he's battling the Red Sticks and so on down in Alabama, and the Seminoles in Florida. Very anti-Native American. When he gets into office, it gets even worse. His idea is to take all the Native American tribes, or most of them, and move them west of the Mississippi River. And we call it in history the Trail of Tears, genocide, you see. Well, again, you have to understand what this meant to Native Americans. You have Native American tribes such as the Cherokee and the Choctaw and the Chickasaw and so on. They're used to having one particular area where they have a house and an area that they farm, and so they're interested. They are primarily in one place, not movable, you see. Under Jackson, what he wants to do is pack them all up, send them across the Mississippi, and put them on the plains. Now you have Native Americans living in teepees and so on, hunting, see, that type of thing. Today we look at it an entirely different way. Again, I want to say this, and this is what most people don't understand. Most people don't understand history, and they don't understand, and I know this sounds trite, but it was a different time. People thought differently at that time. And he's a very, very popular president. By the way, I've been to his home in Nashville. It was very interesting. It's the first time I ever saw cotton gin, and I saw it there, you see. But nevertheless, Andrew Jackson, again, a man of conflict, highly regarded for his preserving the Union and keeping South Carolina in their place at that time and so on. But on the other hand, his attitude towards Native Americans is just unacceptable today. Number 6. Now, here's where I get into a little bit of a discussion. I felt number 6 should even be higher. And I'm going to give it's my reason. It's my reason. It's not maybe your reason. Number 6 is Harry Truman. And let me tell you why I think not only did he deserve number 6, but I would have moved them even higher. And again, everyone won't agree with me, but that's America. Harry Truman had to make a tremendous decision. Remember, the buck stops here. A tremendous decision. Now, don't forget, we've just gone through starting the 4th administration of course, Franklin D. Roosevelt. You see, the war is coming to an end. The war is coming to an end. The focus now is the Pacific. The American forces are getting closer and closer to Japan. If we leave it go as it is, the Americans will ultimately conquer Japan. Ultimately, we will win. It will be at the cost of many, many American men and women, but we will win, you see. Or there's this bomb, and the bomb will bring the war to a quick ending, you see. Well, the war, Americans have lost a lot of lives already. People in the United States just want their husbands or wives or brothers or sisters, what have you, to come home. They just want them to come home, you see. Get the war over, you see. Harry Truman has to make the decision. The buck stops here. He's going to make the decision. Do you drop the bomb or don't you drop the bomb? He chose to drop the bomb, you see. Tibbets, the Enola Gay, you know the whole story. Hiroshima, 80,000 dead. Nagasaki, 40,000 dead. The war comes to an end. If the Americans would have continued on as they were, there would have been many, many, many additional casualties. This broke the back of Japan. That's not why I put him on the list. It's not that he just made the decision. The reason I put him on the list is he had to live with it afterwards. He not only had to make the decision, but then he had to see the casualties involved and all the people that were killed and so on and so forth. When he made the decision, the war came to an end. America is very happy. It was a different time, you see. In the 1980s, the 1990s, people thought he was terrible. They put him way, 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 way down on the list. What a horrible thing, killing all those people. Today, he's reevaluated. He's up again in the top 10, Harry Truman. Again, I have the highest esteem from not just making first of all, who could make that decision? One man had to make that, but he had to live with it. He had to live with it. Well, again, the History Channel says he saved millions of Americans as well as Japanese lives, Under him came the Marshall Plan, reconstruct Europe. His decision, of course, involving Korean War. The Truman Doctrine, which was the U.S. resist the spread of communism. And he started to desegregate the armed forces. Harry Truman. And right now I'm going to ask Neil to put on just a small clip on Harry Truman. Let's take a look.
Hello, I'm Jack Perkins. Welcome to Biography. I remember as a kid growing up in a small town in Ohio the night in 1948 when our parents took my brother and me down to the local train station because the President of the United States was going to visit our little town. In those days, before much television, if you didn't see a president in person, you didn't see a president. So we went, and we saw a small man, wire-rimmed glasses, standing on the rear platform of the train, hands chopping the air, talking excitedly. What we were also seeing, of course, though we didn't realize it at the time, was a feisty politician in the process of pulling off the greatest political upset of our nation's history. Harry Truman, farm boy, soldier, failed haberdasher, machine politician, and ultimately president and statesman. Quite a lot for one man, but then this was quite a man.
April 1945, the nation mourned the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt.
as a new man was about to step into the White House.
I, Harry S. Truman, do solemnly swear.
He had integrity and intelligence, and people began to realize it. That he could make up his mind and stick with it.
Let there be no mistake. We shall completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
He was exactly the same person in public as he was in private. What you saw was what you got.
He said, I'm going to win. When I wake up tomorrow, I'm going to be president, and you can just believe that.
He is now considered one of the great presidents of the United States.
Give him hell, Harry. That's what they remember.
There we are. I just wanted you to see the short clip. I guess that's a habit I have from classroom instruction. When I do classroom instruction, maybe I'm explaining something, then I like to show it. Talk about it, show it. Have greater retention. Number five, and number 5 is now under close watch too. Now we're condemning number 5 also right now, and now I even hear there's even talk about defacing Mount Rushmore, and so all this craziness that's going on around us. Anyway, number 5 I think is most interesting. When you're teaching history, and you're doing American history, and you're doing president administrations, and you go down the list, and you go down and you say, Rutherford B. Hayes. Now, doesn't that light everybody up for the day? James Garfield, Chester A. Arthur, Benjamin Harrison, Grover Cleveland, William McKinley. Is everyone sleeping yet? And then comes the explosion. Theodore Roosevelt. Absolutely an explosion. Let me talk about, and I can't use the way, he didn't like to be called Teddy. We all call him Teddy, well, the teddy bear. We don't like to call him Teddy. He liked to be called Theodore. When he was born, incidentally, he was born in New York City. And there's that famous photograph where he is in the residence in New York looking out a window on Fifth Avenue, and there's a funeral procession going by. It's Abraham Lincoln. And Theodore, as a little boy, is looking down. As a little boy, he had asthma. We know that. The other kids didn't want to play with him, have nothing to do with him. So he did a lot of things on his own. In fact, even in sports, later on in college, he'll take up boxing and rowing, anything he can do by himself. The other kids did not accept him from the very beginning. We know he was very, very interested in taxidermy. The maid sometime would find a dead mouse in the refrigerator or a bird or whatever, interested in all types of things, especially nature and so on. Well, Roosevelt, there's so many things to say about Roosevelt. I think the one thing that always comes into my mind, because I can't imagine the impact, and that was the fact that his wife and his mother died on the same day. It was then that he turned his life around and he went to the Great American West. He went to be a cowboy in the Great America. He went out to the Dakotas. He said that's where America was truly America. Everybody accepted and helped each other, you see. Well, and it was the first time that he said that men accepted him working on the ranch and so on because of his childhood. Well, anyway, he was elected president. He was the youngest president to be elected up until that time, 42 years old. He fought big business and monopolies. He gave us wonderful things. For instance, the national parks. He was very into the national parks, you see, including the Grand Canyon. Bird sanctuaries, a big bird sanctuary in the state of Florida. This we can't even measure. The Panama Canal under Roosevelt, those famous pictures of he visiting the construction sites and so on and so forth. Just think what a mess we would have been in World War II, getting our fleet to the Pacific from the Atlantic if they had to go around South America, you see, the Panama Canal. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work with the ending of the Russo-Japanese War. And today He's this and he's that today, but I have news for the demonstrators today. It was Theodore Roosevelt who invited Booker T. Washington to come to the White House, you see. He was not racist at all. He was the first president to go down in an airplane, and he was the first president to go up in an airplane, rather, and go down in a submarine. I mean, that's what I mean. He's an explosion. There's so many things to talk about. I love this little story about him. He was in the White House one day. There was a reception, and he was going up the steps into the White House in the back, the South Lawn. And who's on the staircase and meets him but the famous portrait painter, John Singer Sargent. John Singer Sargent. And John Singer Sargent turned to Theodore Roosevelt and said, "When would you like your portrait done?" And Theodore Roosevelt turned to him and said, "Now. Moments come and go, seize it and do your best." That's Theodore Roosevelt, you see. Well, let's take a look at Theodore one more time here, and Neil's going to help me out on that. Let's take a quick look at Neil. Here he is.
Only those are fit to live who do not fear to die, and none are fit to die who have shrunk from the joy of life and the duty of life. Both life and death are part of the same great adventure. Theodore Roosevelt.
He was called TR and Teddy. By any name, Theodore Roosevelt was a true American original. At age 42, he was the youngest man ever to become president, and with his youthful vigor and vision, transformed America from a fledgling industrial nation into a world power.
Theodore Roosevelt made the presidency the focus point of American government. He is generally perceived to be the creator of what is called the modern presidency.
TR said no president ever enjoyed himself as much as I, and no wonder. His achievements include building the Panama Canal, creating national parks, and busting big business monopolies. He was the first president to go up in a plane and down in a submarine. And though he loved a good war, Theodore Roosevelt was the first American to win a Nobel Peace Prize.
A whole lot of people see him as almost a human spirit incarnate, enthusiasm personified, this tremendously alive person. Who could be bored with Theodore Roosevelt?
By the way, people right now concerned with Mount Rushmore, when you look there, of course, you have George Washington, of course, the father of our country, Lincoln, the great emancipator, you see, Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. Theodore Roosevelt's there because he made the United States a powerful nation in the world today. Well, nevertheless. Number 4, Thomas Jefferson. Now, he is my favorite president. However, the presidency itself, listen to this. When Thomas Jefferson, of course, was preparing to die, he created his own tombstone. And remember at Monticello what the tombstone says. Here lies Thomas Jefferson, the creator of the Declaration of Independence, the founder of the Statute Laws of Virginia, and the founder of the University of Virginia. And somebody said, "Mr. President, you don't have anything on there about being the 3rd president of the United States." He said, "Nobody will care, and it's not important." Well, it's interesting. And his administration, I find this interesting. First of all, Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence. By the way, I have to tell you something because of the holiday coming up at the end of the week. I was teaching, this is college. 2 years ago, I was doing a summer class, and we were coming up, it was this week, and I said, now don't forget, on Wednesday of this week, we're not going to have class because it's the 4th of July. Does anybody know what we're celebrating? And I just want you to know that out of 30-some students, 1 student knew, and that student was Japanese. They did not know who wrote the Declaration of Independence. They didn't know where it was written, and they didn't know where we'd find it today. Had no idea. So it's kind of interesting. Nevertheless, the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. He was an expert in writing. He could speak 6 languages. Thomas Jefferson was a Renaissance man. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And all you have to do is go to Monticello. Now, why the administration? Well, the administration itself as president does not stand out that much except for one big thing, and that is the Louisiana Purchase. He doubled the size, more than doubled the size of the United States and the famous Lewis and Clark expedition. Wow, just unbelievable. Thomas Jefferson, number 4. Number 3, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt. President, of course, you know, the Great Depression, World War II. Well, you have to understand something right away. You have to understand and say, people must have had tremendous confidence in the president. I heard somebody say to me just not that long ago, and they said, you know what I miss in history? Those wonderful, intimate chats with the president, like the fireside chats of Roosevelt. Well, people still remember those things. There was a closeness. You felt close to the president. And you could only imagine coming through the Great Depression and then entering World War II, you don't want to change horses in the middle of the stream. Into 4 terms of offices, you see. He gave great hope and comfort. Remember, the only thing to fear is fear itself. Franklin D. Roosevelt. He gave us the New Deal, Civilian Conservation Corps, TVA and so on, electricity into the South, elected 4 times, great popularity, great popularity. By the way, the polio thing, I found that interesting too, the backstage type things. For instance, when you go to his home up along the Hudson and you go into the rooms and there are the wheelchairs sitting around you, you don't seem to think about the polio. By the way, that came about when he was a young man and he had been swimming that day. They were out swimming. And he no sooner got back and wet and so on, and there was, as I understand it, there was a fire alarm or something. Somebody needed help, and he went, and he wasn't dried thoroughly, and so on and so forth, and then he felt kind of muscular aches and pains, and developed polio, and so on and so forth. Also, I know I have a video at home where it shows when he would give an address to the people, and the wheelchair was not photographed. Then you wheel him up to there, before you turn the cameras on, they would help him out of the chair and support him, and then turn the cameras on, and then turn the cameras off when he's done and put him back in the wheelchair, you see. The country needed support and encouragement. He was there to do that. FDR. Now we're down to 1 and 2. Remember what I told you before. 1 and 2 is when I did it. If I did it today, 1 and 2 might be changed. 1 and 2 keeps flip-flopping. Historians don't know what to do with it. Should we make them 1 or 2? So they keep flopping back and forth. So when I tell you who's number 2, just remember next week he could be number 1, because they keep changing. It all depends who's doing the list. Number 2, of course, George Washington. George Washington, the father of our country. I just got done reading one of the big bestsellers at the moment, The British Are Coming. Just finished the book. And every time I read something about Washington, I just appreciate him more. Indeed, the father of our country. The father of our country. Washington had his faults like everyone else. However, Washington overcame them. And when you read about the American Revolution, he had everything against him. Everything. He didn't have enough men. He didn't have enough supplies. They didn't have enough money. They didn't have enough food. And he kept losing battle after battle. This is a man who had money, had a big plantation. At any time, he could have said, forget all this, I'm going home. And just go home to Mount Vernon and live the rest of his life. He didn't. He stuck it out and was victorious. And was victorious. In many places in the American Revolution, you think, we're never going to win. Never. Most sane people would have given up and walked away. Washington didn't. He stayed with it, became the first president. Well, anyway, set the standard for the presidency. By the way, when he became the president, nobody knew what to call him. Should we call him Your Highness, Your Majesty, whatever? Just Mr. He'll just take Mr. President. It did not go to his head. Incidentally, usually, like today, they play Hail to the Chief when the president comes into the room. He would arrive early so they wouldn't play the song, because he didn't want everybody to, that type of thing. Everybody have to look at him and so on. He wanted to be called Mr. President. He took by the way, he took the oath in office. He's the only president who did not live in the White House, you see. He lived in New York. You see, they were still building the White House in Washington. John Adams will live in the White House, you see. Well, he will take the oath of office in New York. Take the oath of office in New York. Now, also, you'll have to remember he surrounds himself with people who form this country, people like Jefferson and Hamilton and so Benjamin Franklin and so on, John Hancock, John Adams. Wow, the big names, you see. Well, he proved that democracy could be successful. We had just gone through a period where we call our government the Articles of Confederation. That fell on its nose because it didn't have the power to tax. So we formed a new constitution, you see, legislative, executive, and judicial. How do we prove that the president has any power? George Washington proved it. 2 ways. When he became president, there was a young man down in the Carolinas, in Charleston, walking up and down the street from France. His name was Genet, and Genet was saying to everybody, the French are in the French Revolution at this time, and you should become involved. George Washington, as president, said, we are not going to be involved. We are too young, a fledgling country. Keep your nose out of it, and Genet, shut your mouth. And he did. The second portion that he made that proved the power of the presidency was the Scotch-Irish who lived in western Pennsylvania were making moonshine. And George Washington said, I don't care if you make moonshine, that's your right, but you've got to pay a tax on it. The Scotch-Irish said, we're not paying a tax. George Washington said, you're paying a tax. And he sent federal forces out there and forced them to pay the tax. And it's during his, that's why it says he establishes the presidency. In other words, there's power in the presidency, and he does this. Left office after 2 years. And I think that's interesting too. I have to just pause and talk about that a moment. He could have been president the rest of his life. He was so popular, it could have just gone on and on. No, he said, after 2, that's enough. That's enough for any man, and that was it, and now we go to somebody else. He saw it as a good thing for the government, you see. Well, left office. Proved democracy could work and be successful. Now, on the last 2 today, I'd like to talk about the deaths. Now, you probably think, why? Because I find them fascinating. While I have Washington here, let's go to the death. The death occurred at Mount Vernon. Washington became ill. By the way, after the presidency, he returned to Mount Vernon. That's what he wanted to do. He just wanted to go home to Mount Vernon. When you visit there, and by the way, I'm just saying this, understand they keep changing things at Mount Vernon. A piece of furniture may go here or may go there, whatever. But at one time when you went to Mount Vernon and you saw his bedroom, at the base of the bed was this huge military trunk. He had lived out of that trunk for years and years and years, you say. When he came home to Mount Vernon, he put the trunk at the base of the bed and said to Martha, I'm home and I'm home to stay. Usually the trunk's there. The last time it was moved down to his study and so on. The other thing I want to tell you was this, the death itself. He had, and you can check it, you can go Google it or whatever, they'll tell you exactly what he had. Today, we would have changed maybe his diet a little bit or given him an injection or a prescription. And so, that would have been it, but not at that time. The method at that time of working on ills was called bloodletting. Now, to do bloodletting, I have to use a sharp instrument. The point is this, I cut a vein and let you bleed for a while, and the thought is, as you bleed, the disease leaves with the blood, and then you're just good to go. We'll patch that up and you're good to go. Washington bled to death, you see. Now, to do this, to do bloodletting, I have to get someone with a sharp instrument. So I have to have the barber come. Hello, who has sharp instruments? The barber, you see. So the barber comes and does it. And what comes down to us in history from that? Well, you use these bandages and they're all bloody and so on, and you want them dried and so on. So those bandages, those wet bandages of blood, you usually take out to dry outside. Well, if there's a post on the house, front post, you wrap the bandage around the post. Hence the barber pole today, the red and white stripes. That's the bloody bandages from bloodletting. Washington, indeed the father of our country. Should he be on Mount Rushmore? Absolutely. And I was amazed last week. We just tore down another statue, and where was it? George Washington University. The head of George Washington came down. Interesting. Number 1, Abraham Lincoln. Well, and again, it could switch. It could switch. Well, Abraham Lincoln. It's the American success story. The man born in the log cabin, teaches himself how to read and write and so on, goes on to become a lawyer, goes on to become the President of the United States, you see. It's the American success story. In reading his early life, it's so sad. He falls in love, you remember, and the girl dies. The girl dies, and he is in depression for weeks and so on. It's a very interesting story about the frontier. Well, the frontier, Kentucky, you see, Kentucky. Abraham Lincoln, of course, is revered because of the fact that he kept the United States together during a great crisis, you see. Well, of course, the Civil War. We have to remember from the time that he entered the White House door until, of course, the assassination, almost every day except, I would say, 4, the country was at war. During almost his entire time there, he is at war, you see. Casualty counts coming in every day, depression, all types of things. And he was bothered by depression and so on, dreams and so on. I'm always fascinated with Lincoln when he was in Washington. He was very concerned with ordinary people. Ordinary people were important to him. For instance, every day from, I'm just saying, between 9 and 12 in the morning, he'd have can you imagine, the White House front door open. Have the door open, and he'd be upstairs. The office was on the 2nd floor. The office is where the Lincoln bedroom is today. That was his office at that time. Well, anyway, he'd be in his office, and people would line up on the street, just ordinary people. And they'd allow them to come in one by one. They'd go, and with their problems. Like, I'm having a financial problem, or my son's at war, or whatever. And he would talk to them and give them assurance and so on and so forth, send them on their way. It was unbelievable. Think of that today. The other thing about Lincoln, of course, is the fact of the big high point of his entire career, the Emancipation Proclamation. It was issued, of course, the first day of 1863. He used the Battle of Sharpsburg, well, we say Antietam here. That was, of course, a kind of a draw there in the fall of 1862. He used it as a Union victory, and it was he had been planning this for a long time. And, of course, 1863, he frees the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, so, of course, he's right. During that 4 years or a little bit more that he's in presidency, he will see over 600,000 lives lost in the United States because of this war. It just hangs on and on and on and on, you see. Well, what I want to talk about today is, I talked about the death of Washington. I think the death of Lincoln is most interesting, especially one man's name, and that man's name is John Parker. Now, John Parker may mean nothing to you, but John Parker is a very important man during the night of the assassination, you see. Well, let's take it back to where it was. It was Holy Week. It was Holy Week. Palm Sunday had just taken place. Holy Week, people of religious faith working up into the Easter holiday, you see. The war was coming to an end, and on Tuesday of that week, Holy Week, word was received in Washington that Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. the war was over. The war was over. Lincoln, although there was great celebration in Washington, Lincoln immediately announced to everyone around him that he wants nothing to do with the celebration at that time. He had stress and tension for 4 years. He just wanted to relax, just wanted to relax. It was over, you see. Also, he had been visited by a dream that came nightly, night after night after night. It was the same dream. And the dream was that people were wandering around in the White House, and they were all heading towards the East Room, and they were stopping and saying, why are people going to the East Room? And people stopped saying, well, the president's been killed. His body's in the East Room. He had that dream. It's recorded in history. He talked about it all the time, this premonition, you see. Well, anyway, that was Tuesday. The war was over. Wednesday, at the breakfast table, Abraham Lincoln, Mary Todd, you see. Mary Todd says she has something to ask him. By the way, Lincoln always his nose in the newspapers. He read at least 5 newspapers a day, constantly checking for 4 years on the battles and where the generals were and so on and so on. Mary Todd said, I want to go out. I've got to get out. I've got to get out of the house. And I want to go to the theater. Now, in Washington at that time, the big theater was Ford's, and there was a big production there at that time. It was called Our American Cousin. It was a comedy, and it starred Laura Keene. Laura Keene was one of the big actresses in the United States at that time. Laura Keene was in Washington. She was doing Our American Cousin. Mary Todd wanted to go to the theater. Lincoln's response was he really didn't want to go. Now, you have to understand Mary Todd. I think I should do just a lecture on Mary Todd. Everybody calls Mary Todd the witch, or sometimes even worse names, you say. You have to understand Mary Todd. Mary Todd came from Kentucky, but an entirely different beginning. She came from a plantation with money, you see. And of the children, she was Daddy's little girl. Mary Todd Lincoln got attention. And she wanted attention. Even as a woman, she wanted attention all the time. Why would a woman go to New York and buy 42 pairs of gloves? She wouldn't wear them all in her lifetime, you see. Anyway, she wants to go to the theater. And we know she persisted, as only Mary Todd could persist. If you didn't get it the first time, she's going to nag you until it goes on and on. And so this went on until Thursday. She went to go to this play. So finally, Lincoln gave in and said, called the theater, go down to the theater, see if we can get, They came back, they said, yes, the theater, of course, there is a box, they will prepare it, and Friday night, Good Friday, they'll prepare the box, the 8 o'clock performance, you see. Well, while all this was going on, these people running back and forth between the White House and Ford's Theater, of course, there's a young man standing in the lobby. A man who's very well known in Washington, John Wilkes Booth. He's an actor. He's an actor, a very famous American actor. In fact, his brother, Edwin Booth, of course, is a very famous Shakespearean actor. You see. It's an acting family, you see. They come from northern Maryland, you see. If you're going to Maryland today, say you cross the line there and you're going into Maryland, the first exit is Bel Air. That's where the Booths lived, Bel Air. Well, John Wilkes Booth is in Ford's Theater. Well, you'd expect him. He's in the theater. He's an actor. And he hears all this commotion going on that the president's coming. John Wilkes Booth absolutely hates the president. Absolutely hates the president, you see. And the only way he's going to get over this fact that the South has been defeated is to kill the president. And he's already working in a conspiracy to kill the president, you see. Well, anyway, John Wilkes Booth hears this. He also hears the fact the president's coming Friday night at 8 o'clock. So the next morning, and of course there's great anticipation at the theater. They're cleaning the theater thoroughly. There, of course, is the stage as it is here, and right here, if I was standing in Ford's right now, if I look up to my left, right here, is the box overhanging, the presidential box, you see. They're cleaning out that, and they're putting furniture in there and hanging flags around it. The whole box, the front of the box is going to be decorated. We'll hang the big portrait here of George Washington here and flags around the box, you see. By the way, the one flag that's hanging near the box is the Treasury flag. Remember that, the Treasury flag. So, John Wilkes Booth goes up on Friday morning. There's hardly, and nobody questions him. In fact, he even gets his mail at Ford's Theater. So nobody questions him. So he comes in the morning, and while nobody's there, he goes up into the gallery, up into the balcony, and he winds his way around. Now, to get into the presidential box, you see, if you're in Ford's, you're going to come to a door first. And that door opens, and there's a little tiny hallway there with gas lights, and then there's another door to the left. And when you open that door, you're in the presidential box. There's two doors. John Wilkes Booth worked on both those doors, on the locks, and broke them, that they could be sprung. He set them that they could be sprung. So even though they looked like they were locked, they weren't locked, you see. And then, of course, he even practiced the fact that he went into the box, jumped up on the ledge when no one was around, and jumped down on the stage. Well, I'd say it's really not that far. And Booth was in excellent physical condition. Once he killed the president, jumped down on the stage, you see. It was all planned, you see. Well, they went on putting the theater together. In the box they put, in the presidential box, there was a big horsehair rocker. That's where the president was supposed to sit. There was a smaller chair next to him. That's where Mary Todd would sit. And then there was a love seat over here for two guests. Well, we know at the White House, as soon as they said they were going, Lincoln said, I have a wonderful idea. Let's invite invite General Grant to come. And Julia. Ulysses and Julia Grant, let's invite them. Well, Mary Todd hated them. Absolutely hated them. However, U.S. Grant sends a cable back, I can't come. I'm going to visit my daughter in New Jersey, and while you're at the theater, I'm catching a train to New Jersey that night. I can't come to the theater. So Lincoln says, all right, I know a young man in the military. His name, he's a Major Rathbone. Ask him to come, and he can bring his date with him. Her name was Clara Harris. So there you have it. The president, Mary Todd, Rathbone, and Clara Harris. Well, we now switch to the night, you see. Good Friday. 7 o'clock, Mary's all ready to go to the theater. Lincoln is not. He doesn't want to go. We know that. He postponed. He had all kind of excuses. It was 5 minutes of 8. She's out in the carriage, and he's still not there, you see. In fact, the curtain's going up at Ford's, and he's just leaving the White House because he doesn't want to go. You see. So they get in the carriage, and they go, of course. When they get there, the play has already started. So they will come into Ford's, go up the staircase where the balcony is, and they're crossing the balcony to go down into the box when somebody notices. Everything stops, you see. Hail to the chief. Everybody stands up. Lincoln, no, sit down. Let the play go on. So in the box they go. Clara Harris way over here, Major Rathbone on the love seat, Mary Todd here, Lincoln in the horsehair. Behind Lincoln, directly behind Lincoln, is the door. It's only about that far away, you see, from the door. Now, I get to this name, John Parker. When the president went into the box, on the second door, the outside door, was a man who represented the Metropolitan Police Department, who was there to guard him. His name was John Parker. Now, you know today, the Secret Service today, you say, unbelievable. Secret Service today, if the president is attacked, the Secret Service has to throw themselves in front of the attacker and take the bullet, you see. Well, there's John Parker, and he plops a chair against the door. There he is during the performance. Booth had everything planned. Booth knew the play perfectly. Perfect. He was an actor. He memorized all the lines. He could have got up on the stage at any time and started, so he knew the play perfectly. See? So they're waiting, and what he has mapped out is during the second act, around 10 o'clock, there's going to be a line given on stage that will give a tremendous response of laughter. When that happens, that's the time to do it, you see. Now, listen to this. Let's get back to John Parker. It's 9:30. It's 9:30, and it's intermission. John Parker got up from his seat, went out through the balcony, down the front steps, out the front door of Ford's, and next door to Ford's, until recently. They've just changed it. The national government gave them a lot of money, and they've reconditioned Ford's Theater. It's beautiful. Anyway, next door to Ford's Theater, which up until this time was the ticket office, that was a bar. And John Parker went in that bar and was drinking. By the way, guess who else was in the bar? Booth was also in the bar. John Wilkes Booth was also having a drink. Anyway, here is what history can't determine. At the end of intermission, Parker got up from the bar, went back into the theater, but never went upstairs. He took a seat on the first floor, and the doorways were completely open. And Booth, of course, went up. Now, the question is today, did Booth know Parker? Who knows? We don't know. Booth goes up. You all know the story, of course. He gets to the first door, and he opens it. The gas lights are on in the hallway. He turns them off and moves into that dark hallway, and he's standing at that door. He can hear what's going on the stage. He can hear it. Quietly opens the door and eases himself in. Don't forget, everybody else is on chairs looking down that way. He's standing behind them and takes out a small derringer, you see. Puts it at the back of the president's head. When the laughter comes, he pulls the trigger. Now, we can only surmise what would have happened if U.S. Grant was there. I have no idea. I know that Major Rathbone jumped up, and Booth had a knife and took it like this and slashed Rathbone's arm. And with that, he jumps up on the edge of the stage. By the way, nobody, in fact, people heard the popping, but nobody got excited because they were celebrating in Washington. People were setting off fireworks, so people tell you they're just celebrating outside, you see. Until the people in the audience look up, and there's this man standing on the ledge of the box. It's John Wilkes Booth, and he screams in Latin, "Death to all tyrants." Jumps off onto the stage. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Remember I said the Treasury flag was draped there, along with other flags and memorabilia around the box. When Booth jumped, the spur of his left boot caught into the Treasury flag and knocked him off balance. And when he hits the stage, of course, he damages his left ankle very badly. Goes pop the stage, screams, and runs out the back. People still don't know what's going on. They look up, they hear this woman screaming, it's Mary Todd, and the smoke's coming out of the box. And then we probably have an expression we've used for years and we don't know where it came from. Is there a doctor in the house? That's where that comes from. Is there a doctor in the house? Well, there were three, and they went up to the box. Three military men found that there was nothing they could do. And the decision now was, what do we do with him? He's going to die. Where do we move him? And people said, well, we can't take him to the White House. Cobblestone streets. We'd kill him till we got him to the White House. But across the house, there's a private home called the Peterson House. And so they carried the body out of the theater, across the street, into the Peterson House to the back room. And there he'll die the next morning, about 7 o'clock in the morning, all through that. The government's actually moved into the house, that Peterson House, that night. That's part of the tour today. John Wilkes Booth, very quickly. John Wilkes Booth, of course, gallops off into the middle of the night, you see. The ankle's getting worse and worse. It's raining in Washington and Baltimore. It's raining, terrible. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, he's going down the road. He can't stand it anymore. And he sees a sign by the road, and it says, Dr. Mudd, M-U-D-D. Well, Booth gets Mudd up, and Mudd sets the ankle. And Booth tells him he was thrown from his horse. And so Mudd sets the ankle, and of course, the next day when he gets up, Booth is gone and is trying to get across the Potomac River back into Virginia. the famous Booth trail that you can now take out of Washington. He doesn't get there till several days later. He finally crosses the Potomac, but the Union Army is right behind him. They corner him in a barn. And the man who's in charge, the Union general that's in charge, says, "Don't anybody shoot him. Don't anybody shoot him. We want to take him to trial, to be hung. Don't anybody shoot him." And there's a young man there in the uniform called Boston Corbett. He's a little bit deranged, if you ever read an description about him. Soon as Booth comes running out of the burning barn, they have the barn burning now, and Booth comes running out screaming, Boston Corbett shoots him, you see. And Booth is laying on the ground, and the last two words he says are, "Useless, useless." Lincoln, of course, the dream came true, laid in state in the East Room, then on to the Capitol Rotunda, then put him on the train with a son that he had that died during the years of office, and the two coffins will be taken north, Baltimore, up into Harrisburg. They'll be pausing in all these places, Philadelphia, New York, and then, of course, up to upstate New York, Albany, Utica, and across to Syracuse, Rochester, across as they're going, Buffalo, of course, Ohio, Columbus, and so on, and finally through Indiana, Chicago, and finally Springfield. And there he'll be laid to rest in Springfield. Well, anyway, our time is coming to a close quickly. I just want to close with one quote, and I think this is a marvelous quote from Lincoln. Here it is. "It's not the years in your life, it's the life in your years." Bye. See you later.